crime lab with 3 bullet wounds lying on the table internally bleeding. I'm asking you guys to grab the scalpel with both hands and get the work done.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. Elements of the Hamilton County government face a big test this week. Everyone agrees that the current facility occupied by the coroner and the crime lab is woefully inadequate. Everyone agrees that the offer by Mercy Health to donate its recently vacated hospital in Mount Airy is generous. But because this project has gotten tied to a new facility for the Hamilton County Board of Elections, which is governed by 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, the whole thing may collapse. The leadership of Hamilton County faces a deadline of January the 31st and a challenge. Can we, on a local level, find a way to govern for the common good, or will we choose to wallow in paralyzing partisan bickering that characterizes national and state affairs? Local 12 reporter Deborah Dixon prepared this background report.
Hamilton County needs a new crime lab. This is not news. In March 2012, when Dr. Lakshmi Sammarco was appointed coroner following the death of Dr. Anat Badi, a $95,000 study paid for by the county was on her desk. It recommended a new facility double the current size, costing about $56 million. Commissioners told her the county didn't have that kind of money, but
If you can get an appropriate building donated that wouldn't take that much to renovate, I think we have a good chance of having a new crime lab built.
so she did. Dr. Sammarco met with business leaders, including Catholic Health Partners. It agreed to donate the old Mercy Mount Airy Hospital for a new crime lab. Renovation costs around $21 million, almost a third of the estimate in that report.
It's a 2-year-old issue with almost a year passing by when Catholic Health Partners offered the building.
Are you frustrated?
That would be putting it mildly.
What seems to me a paralyzed county commission to you is just
posturing.
Commissioner Greg Hartman says it's about wanting to do more with that donated space.
That's too big just for the crime lab. The crime lab needs about 100,000 square feet, and we're talking to the Board of Elections, and if the Board of Elections can make it work out there to move their facilities, then it could be a win-win for the community.
So now it's up to the Board of Elections, thrown into the mix at the last minute. The county pays $700,000 a year for different sites for the board, including this one at 824 Broadway. The board is going to vote on whether or not to move to Mount Airy. Possible problem? 2 members are Republican, 2 are Democrat. Some predict a vote along party lines.
I am joined this morning by Dr. Lakshmi Sammarco, the Hamilton County coroner, and Tim Burke, the chair of the Hamilton County Democratic Party and the current chair of the Hamilton County Board of Elections. Welcome to Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers in both cases. Tim, is it all down to the Board of Elections?
No, I don't think it's down to the Board of Elections. Ultimately, this is a decision that will be made by the Hamilton County Commissioners. Frankly, I hope they will accept the gift from Catholic Health Partners. Dr. Sammarco has proven her case that she needs a new crime lab. It ought to go out there. There's the opportunity to create a law enforcement campus out there involving the sheriff's office, involving now a commitment by Mayor Cranley to put certain aspects of the Cincinnati Police Department out there. That's a win-win. It's a bad idea to move the Board of Elections out there.
What is actually involved with this gift, Dr. Sammarco? Is it the building? Is it building and property? And if so, if there's property involved, are there conditions on what can be done with that property?
It's building and property. And from what I understand, there were some plans to use some of the property for the local schools, some of the Catholic schools for a sports center. I'm not sure how far that has come along. But I think the Port Authority was called in to look at more uses for the remaining part of the property beyond the hospital building. And I think that at this point, it's what the commissioners would want to accept.
Okay. I guess what I was driving at there, would there be, if part of this gift is land that could be developed. Would it be possible to sell off some of that land to developers and that the proceeds from that then be helped to offset whatever costs are involved?
I understand the question. I'm not sure I'm aware of any restrictions, but
okay.
You know, the gift hasn't been accepted yet.
Your original vision when you got started on this, and Deb's report mentioned that you've been at this now for 2 years? Over a year, that I know. Okay, yeah. Whatever it is, was to create a justice center out there. And where does that stand? I've heard Sheriff Neal back in December talk, not in a reporter situation, in another situation, talk about this as a possibility that he could move certain administrative functions out there and free up space that could be turned into jail cells, which we desperately need in the Justice Center or someplace. You know, where do some of these other features stand? Well,
the original plan was to develop the property into a large regional law enforcement facility, including the sheriff and some of the sheriff's offices. And the original plan included some of the non-essential offices for the sheriff to move out of the Justice Center, the current jail, and move into the Mount Airy facility, thereby creating space in the current Justice Center. Now that could be renovated to add more than 100 inmates, and predominantly female inmates. You know, there's no
real
space.
Shortage.
There's a real shortage for female inmates. 40 juvenile beds and 100 detox beds. And that's huge. I mean, you're taking a facility that's 1,000 and increasing it by so much more without having to build a brand new building or a brand new jail. Mm-hmm. So moving that to Mount Airy, along with personal crimes, for example, the cybercrime division is a department that could move. Regional narcotics could move. The SWAT team that has their equipment in 4 different locations around the county could have their equipment positioned in 1 location. Mm-hmm. The dive team, did you know that the dive team is positioned at Lunken Airport, and when they have to get their equipment in and out, the FAA requires that the airport is shut down. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of things that we could do with this property in a large law enforcement.
But where does that stand? I mean, has anybody bought into that? Is anybody supporting it?
It's not shelved.
It's not shelved. It's
not shelved. And my understanding is that if we can start with the crime lab, phase in the crime lab, and perhaps as the money comes into the county, my hope is that the facility will still be available for the sheriff and Cincinnati Police, and this is a great opportunity for us to share services.
Tim, why? I don't understand. Why is suddenly the key fulcrum point the Board of Elections and not all of these other things that seem to be intimately tied together?
Nobody has really explained that to us. We were proposed to be brought in here essentially at the last minute. And it's caused some real concern, not only for members of the board, but at the first and only meeting we've had where the public had an opportunity to speak to this, the NAACP came in, raised some very legitimate questions. The site is not well suited for being accessed by mass transit. And as the Cincinnati Enquirer pointed out in their editorial yesterday against moving the Board of Elections out of downtown Cincinnati, we have more than 40,000 households in Hamilton County that do not have an automobile and have to rely on mass transit. This site in Mount Airy has only 1 bus line on it with minimal service.
Let me explain. Since I used to live out there, and since I've also, in doing some of my research over the years, the reason that site is where it is, that hospital was sited at the same time Bethesda North was sited based on the future projections of the interstate system. Well, what was supposed to happen in the northeast quadrant happened, and we see what happened with Bethesda North. It's grown like mad. The Kirby Road connector, which was supposed to be built, and everybody can probably remember the old mound there right on Coleraine Avenue, which was supposed to carry people off of 74 straight up Kirby Avenue.
And take out a big hunk of North Side.
And take out a big hunk of North Side. And end up right there in front of the site of the Mount Airy Hospital. That never got built because all kinds of things. People intervened and said no, and consequently, you can't get there. So it sits in a field.
You just said it. That's absolutely
it just sits
the
in
problem.
a field.
And there are many people who rely on the board being downtown, as it is in every other major city in the state of Ohio. And it's not just during election season, it's all through the year when people have to come to the board to file documents, to register, to do a myriad of other things.
Is there a compromise here? Are you willing to compromise?
Yes, and here's the compromise that frankly we thought was on the table. And that was to move administrative offices of the board, to move all of our storage facilities from Fairfax to Mount Airy, which would make sense under almost any circumstances.
Because you lease all these spaces, right. You don't own them.
Exactly. But to maintain downtown a basic office from the board where people could file, where people could register, where people could file their financial statements that have to be filed, and to maintain downtown the early voting operation. I was frankly shocked last Monday at the Board of Elections meeting when the Republicans on the board were adamantly opposed to that kind of a compromise. My preference would be to maintain the entire Board of Elections downtown. But if push comes to shove, I would be willing to compromise with the maintenance of a small BOE downtown all year round and the operation of early voting downtown.
I have to say that Alex Triantafilo, the head of the Republican Party, has said that the advantage of a place like Mount Airy is lots of parking, and the vast majority of people, in fact, do have automobiles. Yes, some people don't, but the vast majority do, and therefore it really shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, look at the 24,000 people that came to the Board of Elections personally to vote during the last presidential election, and look particularly at who stood in line for hours to be able to get in there and vote, and who those people were. Alex accuses me of making politics out of this. That's what elections are. Those were largely African-American, largely Democratic voters.
Women.
And women, thank you, Lakshmi. What they're trying to do, quite bluntly, is make it more difficult for those folks to vote.
If the Board of Elections can't find a compromise and can't come out to Mount Airy, and even though I guess the county commissioners could decide whatever they want to decide, I mean, they're the ultimate decision makers, but what happens? What happens as of January the 31st? Because there's a deadline here.
There's a deadline.
So what happens on January 31st? Does the whole deal go away?
Well, I'm hoping that they'll do what this county needs. I mean, there's bipartisan support for moving the crime lab, enlarging the services and the facilities that we have. So that's not the issue. Everybody in this county wants to feel safe, bottom line. And part of that is having a local crime lab.
But, okay, we run up to the January 31st deadline.
If they don't accept the
gift, does Mercy pull it off the table?
Yeah. Mercy has lined up bidders to knock the building down. We don't have time. We have to make a decision.
Because Mercy right now is maintaining the building. I mean, maintaining an empty... Hey, we've all seen in this cold snap, it goes on forever, frozen pipes and what it does to buildings.
Absolutely.
So they're having to maintain the building, and their point is they're not going to continue to maintain that building forever?
They've agreed to maintain it up to now. They've given us 3 extra months, and they've paid the maintenance on it. So, yeah, I don't think they're going to maintain it forever. And I think that if the county needs more time to make a decision, the county's probably going to have to take over maintenance.
Yesterday, we're taping on Friday morning. Yesterday, Thursday, Mayor Cranley raised this possibility at the Shillito's building downtown for the Board of Elections, which would be a way of keeping it downtown, solving some of the board's issues. And, yeah, there's
and solving some of the county commissioners' issues as well, because what the county is saying is we want out from under the $700,000 a year lease.
Right.
What John Cranley has proposed is we'll give you this space in the old Lazarus building rent-free.
Okay.
And John also made a commitment about moving city offices, city law enforcement offices, out to the Mount Airy site.
Right, right. So, could it be that there's space in the Shillito's building for a new crime lab?
280,000 square feet, and if Board of Elections only needs 100,000 square feet and we need 100,000 square feet, I mean, technically speaking, probably, but would it work with our operations? We have to have ground level. You have to
have ground level.
Absolutely. I mean, we have the deceased have to be brought in and picked up, and we have certain pieces of equipment that actually have to be on ground level. And so we need to have ground level access and security. I mean, first and foremost, security and safety of the personnel, the deceased, and the evidence. And so we would have to look at the facility. I have not looked at the facility, but we would have to look at it and see what it would take. But remember, there's going to be a renovation cost.
There's going to be a renovation cost any place.
But
I mean, so
the beauty of going into an old hospital for us is a lot of the functions, a lot of what we need, a lot of the infrastructure is already there. So theory is the renovation cost is less.
I'm thinking even of electrical supplies. I mean, which your equipment takes lots of electricity, and they're set up for medical. Shillito's building is an aging building, and I'm sure it isn't wired.
They have
the
a
same
power
way.
plant at Mount Airy, and they have a huge backup generator, which is pretty new.
And one of the challenges is mixing the two uses, because we're a very public operation. The coroner has to be a very closed operation. What the county is proposing, if we move out to Mount Airy, is we get essentially what is the basement level of the building for the public access, and then we would be on the second and part of the third floors. So it's not a mix that works very easily.
Right. Well, that's in the future. The immediate thing is what happens this coming week. We'll be paying a lot of attention to this. Thank you for being with us this morning and explaining this. Stay tuned. 120 Japanese companies already operate in our region, employing over 12,000 people. What are the prospects and challenges for growing more Japanese investment in Mid-America? Welcome back. The fact that we live in a global economy is a given by this point. Often, however, that is talked about only in terms of jobs moving offshore. What doesn't get talked about is the foreign investment by companies in the United States. For example, 120 Japanese companies employ over 12,000 workers in the greater Cincinnati region. Statewide in Ohio, 420 Japanese companies have created 65,000 jobs. As you can see from this map, the companies are clustered in our area along the interstate system, with a concentration in northern Kentucky, especially around Toyota, and Butler County with Pacific Industries. Much of this investment is directly connected to the automobile industry. On Thursday afternoon, the Japan-American Society of Greater Cincinnati sponsored a conference entitled Japan in Mid-America: Renewal, Challenges, and Opportunities. I am joined this morning by Clyde Prestowitz, one of the keynote speakers. Mr. Prestowitz is a founder and president of the Economic Strategy Institute. He is recognized as a leading writer and strategist on issues around globalization and competitiveness. Prior to founding the Institute, Mr. Prestowitz served as a counselor to the Secretary of Commerce in the Reagan administration and was vice chair of the Commission on Trade and Investment in the Asia-Pacific region in the Clinton administration. Welcome to Cincinnati.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And big topic here. What would you say is the thing that would attract Japanese companies? We've had a lot of investment in Ohio and in greater Cincinnati, as I was just trying to point out. What attracts them to create a footprint in a mid-American city like Cincinnati?
Well, I think there's a long history here. If you go back to the early 1980s, remember that imports into the U.S. of Japanese autos were eating up Detroit, and the U.S. had a large and growing trade deficit with Japan. And at that time, actually, the Carter administration and then the Reagan administration negotiated with the Japanese what are known as voluntary, in quotation marks, export restraints. And so actually there was a limit on the amount of autos that Japanese car companies could export to the U.S. And so in response to that, initially the Japanese then put factories in the U.S. to get around this limitation. Now that was 30 years ago. In the meantime, the Japanese have discovered, and other countries, producers also have discovered, that the U.S. is a good place to make things. And that
most people would say, though, gee, compare what we hear is U.S. is an expensive place to make
Well,
things.
see, you're right, and it's a very interesting point because it's not. In the auto industry, for example, the U.S. right now today is the low-cost, the global place to make cars. And that's because we have a very high rate of productivity. We have a workforce that is disciplined and anxious to work. In fact, I think the question is not so much why have these companies invested in the U.S. The real question in my mind is why not more of them? We still have a trade deficit with virtually all of the Asian countries and with Japan. And yet the U.S. has become a very attractive place to produce. You see many of the European auto companies have invested over here, and the Japanese have invested as well. But you know, I was asked once on a show in Japan, what can Americans make that Japanese could buy? And I said, Toyotas. And it's true. And so my question is, why aren't we having more investment, and why aren't we not only producing autos for the U.S. market, but why aren't we exporting them back to Japan or back to Korea?
What's the Japanese answer to that? Why aren't they investing even more in the United States, importing them back to Japan?
Well, there are a lot of responses to that. And one of them is cost, as you said, that there is an argument that it costs to export back to Japan. But I think the main thing is that Japan has a huge auto industry. It has capacity to make about 13 million cars, but it only makes 9. About 4 million are sold in Japan, about 5 million are exported globally. That leaves 4 million cars of excess capacity in Japan. So the argument is, well, gee, we have so much capacity, we can't be bringing things in.
The Japanese economy has been through a long period of slow growth, no growth. Are there other things in Japan, other types of industries that have emerged, technological industries, that we should be paying attention to besides just the auto industry? Obviously, in this area, the auto industry is what we know about, and all of these suppliers do.
Right.
But are there other things going on in Japan that we ought to be paying attention to?
Well, there's lots of stuff going on in Japan. I mean, Japan has long dominated consumer electronics. It has always been a major player in the semiconductor industry, the computer industry. In the robotic industry, Japan is the world leader in all kinds of robots. Japan is putting a lot of emphasis into biotechnology and into the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries. One thing, as you mentioned, Japan's economy has suffered from low growth, and part of that is because the population is shrinking and aging rapidly. And I think about 25% of Japanese population is over the age of 65. So that has created a demand for all kinds of healthcare and elder care technology and facilities that Japan has, by dint of that, has become a world leader in those things. So as the U.S. population ages,
I was going to say, that's where we're headed,
a lot
too.
that we can learn from Japan.
Yeah. Do you think those are the sorts of areas that Japan would look to create a presence in the United States?
Yes, they're doing
sometime?
that. They're actively promoting, because they recognize they have an advantage in that area, they're actively promoting them.
Yeah, I know there's a free trade agreement, and we don't want to get into all of that. I don't have time. But for a local area like us, in the middle part of the United States, what should we be doing to make ourselves attractive to Japanese investment or foreign investment generally? What are the most important things for us to pay attention to?
Well, I think that Cincinnati has long been a center of manufacturing and of advanced technology. And so maintaining the educational infrastructure so people have the skills necessary to compete globally is very important. You mentioned the free trade agreement, and these agreements are about jobs. So I really think that local people you know, there's the slogan, act locally, but think globally.
Right.
I think Cincinnati people need to think globally, because these free trade agreements, we call them free trade agreements, but they're really very much about where actually does the manufacturing, do the jobs go? And so it's important for local people to be thinking about, what is this big free trade agreement going to do to me?
Well, don't have time to get into all the details of that. Thank you for being here for this conference, and thank you for joining us on Newsmakers.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the people who are working to shape our region for the future. Have a good week.